The 6th of October is a very historical day for me. It's a historical day for a member of SADTU. It's historical for the people of South Africa. Nelson Mandela, our first democratically elected president, said when we launched SADTU in 1990 that SADTU is the beacon of hope.
Welcome to SADTU Online TV. I'm your host, Nomusa Cembi. In our studio today, we have one founder member of this lovely organization and also an education activist, Prof. Mary Metcalf. Professor Mary, welcome to SADTU Online Television.
Thank you so much, Nomusa. I'm so happy to be here.
SADTU will be celebrating 32nd birthday on the 6th of October. This organization was born on the 6th of October 1990. Professor Metcalf is here to explain to us where it all began. We understand that SADTU wasn't born on that 6th of October 1990. There were many meetings, there were many issues that took place in the run-up to that 6th of October 1990. What happened before that?
It's a very interesting question, and the date of the birth of SADTU in 1990 is such a critical year in the history of our liberation struggle and in the birth of our new democracy. So in 1990, what's critical about that year was the year of the unbanning of the ANC, the unbanning of the SACP, and of course the release of our jailed leadership, including President Mandela. What happened before 1990 is that teachers were very active in anti-apartheid resistance. Activities such as the South African Communist Party, such as ANC, were completely banned. And organization, political organization across the country was driven very much in the 1980s by organizations at local level. And the organizations at local level did the work of political mobilization, did the work of conscientizing people. It's significant to me that we have SADTU House here in Johannesburg as Matthew Ganiwe House, because Matthew Ganiwe was one of the many education activists across the country who worked in individual structures and liaised across at a local level, at a regional level, at a provincial level, remembering they were different provinces, and together made a mass movement towards democracy.
Before SADTU, we're in a country that was divided by race. Teachers were divided. And when SADTU was formed, all those came together and eventually forming SADTU. We understand it had to take people going to as far as Harare. Can you take us through that process?
The process of trying to seek teacher unity could only be accelerated after 1990, because before the unbanning of political organizations, you are right that there was a massive fragmentation of the country of teachers, because we had the apartheid education departments, the Bantustan education departments, and within that, great government control of what people could do or say. I'm going to give you an example. A friend of mine was one of the few people who refused to join the Inkatha-aligned teacher union in KZN, and they wouldn't let him teach. So there were multiple organizations of teachers in organizations such as NUSA and others, but we had to develop a unified approach to teachers, because you have one union, one federation, one union, and the sense that the difference between teacher organization pre-1990 and post-1990 is defined firstly by the anti-apartheid struggle, and then after 1990, democratic South Africa. How do we, in a democratic South Africa, make sure that teachers as workers have voice, that they can organize for the kind of education quality and system that we want, but also conditions of service. And within that debate, There was always a tension between the question of teachers as workers and teachers as education professionals seeking the best for education. That has subsequently, I think, really been developed and resolved within the union, which is committed to both of those goals. If we go back to 1990 and the formation of SADTU, it was built on the back, firstly, of uniting anti-apartheid teachers committed to working for a non-racial, non-democratic future. But they were also the beginning to think about how we worked with other teacher organizations which were not historically part of that progressive fold, and there was a period of the teacher unity talks. So the teacher unity talks had the intention of having a single teacher union in the country.
Did that perhaps have a negative impact in any way?
I think the resistance to a single union was informed by several factors. One was the debate between professional versus an identity as a worker, identity as a trade union member, and that was difficult to bridge in the beginning. The apartheid identities, the ethnic identities, the racial identities that apartheid created found resonance with some South Africans who found it hard to give up that separate identity and didn't fully embrace being part of a non-racial, non-ethnically defined. SADTU has always stood out as an organization that's committed not only to improving education and the quality of education, but understanding the need for workers to be organized to be a positive force in society.
Let us move from the launch in 1990 to 94. At that time, it was still the old apartheid government. There were struggles, of course, for the recognition of this union. Can you take us through that period? I remember, I think it was in 93, there was a huge strike, for that.
The period between 1990 and 94 has to be understood as a period in which we had not really achieved our democracy and in which there were very negative forces who were trying to minimize the impact of the liberation movements as we moved towards our democracy. We didn't have a new constitution. We didn't have an agreement for a new country. What we had were these multiple governments within one country resisting what they had in some ways recognized to be inevitable in the unbanning, but we didn't have a new order yet. So that was the period where we saw massive violence in the country, KZN and Gauteng. That was all part of the destabilization. It was part of trying to weaken what had been built up over years of struggle, which was a strong movement that was clear about the country it wanted to create. So there was destabilization. Teachers, because of the political conscientization that had happened within the formation of SADTU and all of the work of activists before then, knew that they had to advance principles, and those principles had to become part of the new order. So the principles that were being promoted, of course, non-racialism, non-sexism, but the rights of workers to organize, the importance of unions in education. So 1990 to 1994 was a period of advancing principles of democracy that needed to be captured in what we did after 1994. Once 1994 happened and we had the joy of the democratic breakthrough in terms of the first non-racial educations in united South Africa, there was so much that had to be done. Creation of new provinces that didn't exist before, creation of new education departments, creation of legislation such as the Labour Relations Act that gave the right to workers to organize in a way that had never been understood before. So teacher struggles before 1990, teacher struggles between 1990 and 94, And ongoing teacher struggles have to be understood in their historic context.
After 94, we saw people like you who were activists becoming part of government and becoming part of that, formulating those policies and legislation. How did that have any impact in the union itself? The fact that people like you moved to be part of government?
After 1994, there were many people who had been active in unions and who had been very active in the struggle for the achievement of 1994 who were taken into government. I don't know if I should mention names that come to mind, but let's take someone like Duncan Hindle. Duncan Hindle moved very soon into the national department, the new DBE, which had to bring all of the apartheid education departments that existed at a national level together, which I can explain, but I don't think you want that history lesson today. But there were other people like Kevin and Kwane in Northern Cape. There were people all over the country who moved into government. Now, that was, I think, there was a loss of leadership, but not a loss that I think weakened the union, because the union had strong leadership that rapidly rose through the ranks. And not all of the activists from SADTU that left and went into government necessarily went into education. So the impact on the union was, I think it gave them a base of an insight into the challenges of governance, because there were people finding their way, such as myself, learning how government should work, how we want our government to work. And there was also, I think, the formulation of a relationship with fellow comrades and activists, but playing different roles. And those roles do have to become different. I worked very hard in Gauteng to make sure that we still, as within the ANC, within the alliance, worked very closely with SADTU. As we were busy formulating policy and considering responses to challenge, I met, I think it may even have been on a weekly basis, with comrades from SADTU, comrades from COSAS, so we could think through the challenges that were being addressed, explain why we're doing things. That interaction definitely has diminished, I think, over time. I don't think the ANC policy department plays that kind of role. And so, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is the discussion that we need to have. If I talk about why it's a good thing, I think that we can't assume that just because we have our new democratic order, that everything that we wish to achieve in society has been achieved, and that's definitely not the case. We need, I think, to support each other in terms of critical discussions that can advance our society. But on the negative side, the roles and responsibilities of teacher unions, as opposed to somebody in government, are complementary, and politically we share the same goals. But I think sometimes we've had difficulty understanding how to influence each other in a way that's consistent with democratic principles. Perhaps I need to explain that more. So, for example, because we don't have a long history of a democracy, there's a attitude often which is winner takes all. I've won, and I'm taking my people into my ideas with our goals. But that's not how you build a united country. You have to understand that you've won an election of the majority in order to lead everybody. And it can't become exclusive. The worst forms of that is what you've seen sometimes with ANC leaders saying, I'm not building houses for people who didn't vote to me. You're elected to lead everyone. And in government, you're appointed to lead everyone. So the close ideological and political shared aims and ideals must continue to inform us wherever we're working. But the unions have a particular responsibility and government has a particular responsibility, and they're not the same.
This history relationship between SADTU and government is used by the opposition at times to say unions are the ones who are leading. Government is not leading. What do you say to that?
I think that unions have a very strong responsibility to lead debate and discussion in education. That's all of the unions, because they all have a membership base and they all have a responsibility to take their membership forward. The question of SADTU dictating to government is a complete misreading of anything that I've ever seen in debates and discussions and policy formulation within the country. I think that a good leader in government needs to consult with all stakeholders, not only the largest. It's the search for ideas, it's the search for solutions, it's the search for the wisdom that exists outside of you. So if I mention the names of other organizations, SADTU, NAPTOSA, PEU, SAAU, must all have the ear of government, and we have formal ways of doing that so that it's transparent. There may be informal conversations, but that listening to unions is on the record. It's part of good democratic practice anywhere in the world. And for anyone to argue that SADTU dominates those conversations, I think they misread the processes that are put into place.
Can you take us through to the engagements that were there? I'm sure it was quite a debate even within SADTU as to how does the union balance between being a professional body and a trade union, going into strikes. How serious was that debate and how was it resolved?
It is true that the right to strike was a very controversial issue. For some of the unions, the sense that children would suffer because teachers were not going to school was something that contradicted, went against the grain of their deep professionalism and vocational orientation. The sense that young children might be on the streets when they should be at school became a mobilizing point for them to say, we will not become a union. Now that was a simplification and a mischaracterization of the work of a union. The work of a union isn't just to organize strikes. The work of a union is to influence policy, to understand the political and economic context, to give guidance to its members, so that as a form of mobilization in society for the goals that you want to achieve, your members are informed so that you can exercise leadership in society. We see union leaders talking in public platforms about issues that are not directly related to conditions of service, but which are important in society. So that characterization of it all being about striking was a simplification. That was the first thing. And what I find interesting is that there is no teacher union in South Africa today who themselves have not reached a position where they understand that sometimes they will be part of withdrawal of labor. So that issue seems to be better understood than the initial polarization. My sense of how SADTU has moved is that because the birth of SADTU was rooted so much in struggle against these apartheid governments, apartheid education departments, and there had been so much resistance, and there was not yet a sense of a union that is a leader in society rather than a union that is sacrificing lives of its members to defeat an enemy that is the state. that as SADTU has moved into this leadership in society in an inclusive way rather than in an anti-government way, an anti-apartheid way, SADTU itself has elevated. There were very important decisions taken and resolutions taken that affirmed, yes, we are workers, yes, we're going to defend the rights of our members, but we also have a commitment to take the country forward on the basis of our energy and insights in improving the quality of education.
The union has challenges, mainly from the opposition. There was a time when there was a call for education to be an essential or essentialized.
To rule out the rights of workers to organize on the basis of it being an essential service is not a decision that should be taken lightly. So I accept that there may be times in which the right of a worker to organize might be limited. And I can understand that people would see education as being part of that. But it is unacceptable to not make provision for all workers to have a say and to be heard in matters related to their conditions of service. The narrative in South African education and media, and I have to resist it all of the time, is that teachers are always on strike. That is not the case. When were teachers last on strike in South Africa? It was 2013, I think. Today we're in 2022. This narrative that we're always on strike is nonsense. SADTU and the other unions have used their power to strike with huge professional responsibility.
Looking back when you started, how do you feel to see SADTU going all out? Members are capacitated and we contribute towards quality public education.
I'm very proud of where SADTU has arrived in 2022 from where we started in the days before apartheid, and I'm very excited about the future for SADTU. It's wonderful. It's a joy to see.
Your message just to the general membership and also the leadership of SADTU as an elder of this union. Okay. What words of wisdom can you give to the union?
The future of this country depends on the quality of education that we're giving to every one of our learners across these very unequal contexts. I have such respect for the work of teachers. I think teachers are not recognized adequately in terms of the difficulties under which they work and their commitment to learners. To be part of a union that supports you in that work, not only in terms of the content and substance of the work and your own development and growth within that work, but also in addressing the systemic problems and addressing the ways in which we need to make our education departments more effective, is the huge responsibility in growing our country and addressing the developmental challenges, addressing the poverty, addressing the unemployment. We have a lot to thank our teachers for and to thank SADTU for.
Happy birthday, SADTU, happy birthday. Long live SADTU, long live. Long live the workers, long live. Amandla! you.